I should have listened to Jessica when she insisted we go to the movies instead of the carnival. I should have paid attention to the knot in my stomach when I looked up at the 200-foot-tall Ferris wheel dominating the Aventura Mall Carnival. But I, Emily Carter, have always been stubborn when it comes to living in moments that feel special. I can't, Em. Seriously, I can't. Jessica gripped my arm, her face as pale as paper as she stared up. You know, I've been terrified of heights since I was a kid. I sighed, gazing at the imposing structure rising against the starry Miami sky. After 3 months of working late on soul-crushing architectural projects, I needed that view of the illuminated city. I needed to feel alive again. It's fine, Jess. I'll just go alone. Are you sure? I can wait down here. Of course. It's only 20 minutes. The line was surprisingly short for a Thursday night. I pulled out my phone to check messages from the office when I felt a presence beside me. I looked up and nearly let the device slip from my hands. The most elegant man I had ever seen was standing there, as if he belonged to a world completely different from this amusement park. His Armani suit was flawless, every line perfectly tailored, the Italian silk tie adjusted with mathematical precision. His Italian leather dress shoes gleamed under the colored lights of the nearby carousel. He stood out among the families in shorts and t-shirts, like a Renaissance masterpiece in a modern art gallery. But it wasn't just the clothes. It was the way he moved, the way he held himself, how his gray-blue eyes scanned the surroundings with an attention that seemed to catalog every detail. There was something in his erect posture, in the controlled way he breathed, that suggested a natural authority. This man was used to being obeyed. Before I could fully process his presence, he stepped directly into the Ferris wheel car when our turn came. Without asking for permission, without introducing himself, he simply sat beside me and lowered the safety bar. "Excuse me," I protested, finally finding my voice. "This is my turn, and I apologize for the intrusion." His voice was deep, controlled, with a faint accent that hinted at a privileged upbringing. When he smiled, not a common smile, but something that mixed aristocratic charm with an indefinable hint of danger, I felt my indignation melt like ice in the Miami sun. The wheel began to move, carrying us slowly upward. "You didn't even ask if I wanted company," I murmured, but my voice came out more curious than annoyed. "Would you have said yes?" He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt with a practiced, almost nervous motion. I noticed they were gold cufflinks, discreet but clearly expensive. "Probably not." "Then it's better this way." His eyes met mine, and for a moment I felt as if he could read my soul. "I'm Alexander, but you can call me Alex." "Emily." The word came out automatically, as if my capacity for suspicion had been temporarily switched off. As we ascended, Miami stretched out below us like a carpet of diamonds scattered on black velvet. The city lights created hypnotic patterns that reflected in Biscayne Bay. It was exactly the view I needed to see, but suddenly it seemed less important than the man beside me. "You're not afraid of heights," Alexander observed, and there was something in his tone that suggested genuine admiration. "Should I be? Most people are. It's instinctual, the fear of falling, of losing control." He looked down at the lights. "I work with a lot of people who are afraid of everything." "What kind of work do you do?" For a fraction of a second, I saw something cross his face. A shadow, an almost imperceptible hesitation. Then the charming smile returned. "Family business, imports and exports, nothing too exciting." He changed the subject with professional skill. "And you?" "Let me guess. Something creative. You have the hands of an artist." I looked at my own hands, realizing he'd noticed the small paper cuts and ink stains I always carried. Marks from my work with architectural blueprints. "Architect. I specialize in high-end residential projects." "Fascinating." And for the first time, his interest seemed completely genuine. It must be rewarding to create spaces where people will build their lives, their memories. We talked about architecture as the car swayed gently at the top of the wheel. Alexander showed a surprising knowledge of the subject. He quoted Gaudí and Frank Lloyd Wright with the ease of someone who truly appreciated art, not just pretended to know it to impress. When I mentioned my fascination with Italian architecture, his eyes lit up. "Italy is special. I spent a lot of time there when I was young." For a moment, his expression softened. and I glimpsed something vulnerable behind the flawless facade. Maybe one day I can show you some places few tourists ever see. The promise hung in the air between us like a dangerous and tempting possibility. As we began to descend, I realized I didn't want the 20 minutes to end. Alexander had a way of paying attention that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. It wasn't just superficial charm. There was an intensity in his eyes that suggested he truly saw me, truly heard me. "Would you like to get some coffee?" he asked, as the car came to a stop, his hand helping me out with an old-fashioned courtesy that seemed natural for him. I should have said no. I should have remembered all the warnings about mysterious, elegant men who appear out of nowhere. But there was something magnetic about Alexander that made any answer but one impossible. Yes, the 24-hour diner he chose was a few blocks from the park, a common place that contrasted strangely with his elegance. But it was there that I started to notice the details that should have alerted me. First, the watch, a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than my car. Second, the way the waitress treated him, not just with professional politeness, but with an almost reverential deference that went beyond what a well-dressed customer would normally receive. And third, the two men in dark suits sitting at separate tables, clearly pretending not to watch us. "Do you have bodyguards?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Alexander followed my gaze briefly, then turned his attention back to me with that enigmatic smile. "Let's just say my family has a lot of responsibilities. Sometimes it's wise to be cautious." It wasn't an answer, but the way he said it, with that deep, controlled voice, made me decide not to press. For now. We talked for 2 hours. Alexander was funny, intelligent, and possessed a vast knowledge that spanned art, literature, and history. He spoke of travel like someone who knew the world, of wine like someone with access to the best, of classical music with the passion of a true connoisseur. But whenever I asked about his personal life, he skillfully deflected. It was as if an invisible wall surrounded certain parts of his existence, allowing access only to what he chose to reveal. When it was finally time to leave, Alexander didn't ask for my number. Instead, he handed me a business card made of heavy, expensive, cream-colored cardstock, with only a phone number embossed in gold. "Call me when you want to see me again," he said, taking my hand and kissing it lightly. The gesture should have felt dated, but from him it was absolutely devastating. Then he disappeared into the Miami night, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with more questions than answers, and a sense of emptiness I couldn't explain. Jessica was waiting in the car, clearly worried. "Where have you been?" "It's been 3 hours. Getting coffee." I showed her the card, still feeling the warmth of his lips on my hand. "With who?" "A man I met on the Ferris wheel." Jessica examined the card skeptically. "Just a number, no name, no company." "Emily, this is weird. It's mysterious. It's dangerous. Normal men don't walk around with bodyguards and watches that cost a fortune." I knew she was right. I knew Alexander was hiding massive secrets. I knew I should throw the card away and forget those gray-blue eyes that seemed to hold the mysteries of a world I didn't know. But 3 days later, when I finally found the courage, I dialed the number. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. Emily, just my name, spoken in that deep voice, was enough to make my heart race. "Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "Zuma, South Beach, 8 o'clock. I'll pick you up." And just like that, with a 30-second phone call, I sealed my fate with a man I knew absolutely nothing about, except that he had the power to make my world feel small and colorless in his absence. The next night, when I heard the doorbell at 7:45, military punctuality, I opened the door to find Alexander even more devastatingly elegant than before. This time, he wore a navy blue Tom Ford suit that seemed molded to his body, a silk tie that perfectly matched his eyes, and he carried a single white rose. "For you," he said, offering the flower. As I put the rose in a vase, I noticed the silver Lamborghini parked in front of my modest apartment building. 2 dark cars flanked the street, discreet but clearly part of some security detail. "Ready?" Alexander offered his arm. I grabbed my purse, took one last look in the mirror, and stepped out of my simple apartment into a world I didn't yet know how dangerous and seductive it could be. Zuma was exactly the kind of place I imagined frequenting only on very special occasions. The kind of restaurant where a meal cost more than my monthly electric bill. Alexander was treated like royalty from the moment we arrived. The maitre d' led us to the best table, strategically positioned in a private corner from which we could see the entire room. "Do you come here often?" I asked, noticing how Alexander adjusted his chair to have a full view of the restaurant's entrances. "From time to time, mostly for business." During dinner, I discovered new facets of his personality. He ordered for both of us in fluent Italian, chose a wine that the sommelier approved with reverence, and demonstrated an intimate knowledge of the Japanese cuisine they served. But what impressed me most was how he made me feel, like I was the most interesting woman he had ever met. "Tell me about your latest project," he prompted. And when I started talking about the house I was designing for a family in Coral Gables, he listened with complete attention, asking intelligent questions about architectural choices and structural challenges. "Do you actually care about this stuff? Or are you just being polite?" "I care." His response was serious, with no trace of his usual charming smile. I spend a lot of time in worlds where people feign interest out of greed or fear. It's refreshing to talk to someone who speaks about things they truly love. There was a melancholy in his voice that made me want to ask about these worlds he mentioned, but something in his expression told me it wasn't the time. Over dessert, he told me about a recent trip to Italy, not the usual tourist details, but intimate stories about small family-owned wineries, about local artists whose work would never reach famous museums, about afternoons spent in ancient piazzas, talking to old men who held the country's real history. "You speak like someone who knows Italy on a very personal level," I observed. "My family has connections there, deep roots." Again, an answer that wasn't an answer. But there was something in the way he spoke of Italy that suggested much more than simple tourism or even casual business. When he drove me home, he stopped the Lamborghini in front of my building, but didn't immediately turn off the engine. We sat in silence for a moment, the sexual tension that had been building all night finally impossible to ignore. "Emily." My name sounded different in his voice, more intimate, more vulnerable. "Yes? I need you to know that my life is complicated. There are things about me that everyone has secrets, Alexander." He turned to face me fully, and I saw something desperate in his eyes. Not all secrets are the same. Before I could answer, before I could think about the implications of what he was trying to tell me, I leaned in and kissed him. It was as if the world exploded into colors I had never seen before. His lips were firm, warm, and when he deepened the kiss, pulling me against him, I felt like I was falling from a height far greater than the Ferris wheel where we met. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing heavily. "This is dangerous," he murmured, his forehead resting against mine. "I know." "You don't, not really." "Then show me." He looked at me as if I were something precious and fragile that he was about to break. "I can't. I shouldn't." "But you will?" A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. "Yes, God help me, but yes." For the 3 days following our first date at Zuma, I couldn't focus on anything. Every line I drew on my architectural projects curved like Alexander's smile. Every shadow on the blueprints reminded me of the mysteries he carried in his gray-blue eyes. Jessica showed up at my office on Monday with coffee and that "we need to talk" expression I'd known since college. "You're different," she said, perching on my drafting table. "Since Thursday, you've been walking on air. Don't be dramatic." I looked him up. She pulled out her phone. "Alexander." I only found vague references to import-export companies. Nothing about the man himself. No social media, no photos from events. For a guy who clearly has enough money to dine at Zuma every week, he's suspiciously invisible online. I stopped drawing. I had done the same obsessive search over the weekend. Maybe he just values his privacy. Or maybe he has reasons to stay hidden. Jessica took my hand. Men like that, rich, mysterious, with security details, are usually involved in things normal people like us don't want to know about. You're being paranoid. I'm being careful. There's a difference. But when my phone rang that afternoon and I saw the number I had already memorized, all of Jessica's warnings dissolved like sugar in the rain. "Are you free tomorrow night?" Alexander's voice had that deep tone that made me forget my own name. "Yes." There's an exhibition at a gallery in Wynwood I'd like to see with you. Contemporary Italian art. Sounds perfect. 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up. The next night, Alexander arrived driving a metallic blue Aston Martin that reflected the city lights like a liquid jewel. This time, he wore a more casual suit, if something likely costing $5,000 could be called casual. In gray linen, his tie slightly loosened. It was the first time I'd seen him less than immaculate, and somehow it made him even more devastatingly attractive. The gallery in Wynwood was small and intimate, specializing in emerging artists. Alexander knew the owner personally, another sign that his world was much larger and more connected than I had imagined. As we walked among the paintings, he revealed a deep knowledge of art that went far beyond casual appreciation. "This is a Morandini," he said, stopping before a canvas depicting Roman ruins bathed in golden light. He died young, at 32. Very few people know his work. How do you know so much about him? My family. We've been collecting Italian art for generations. For a moment, his expression softened. My grandfather used to say that art was the only way to keep your soul alive when everything around you was difficult. There was something in the way he said difficult that suggested much more than financial trouble or common family disagreements. After the exhibition, we went to a small Cuban restaurant that contrasted sharply with the luxury of Zuma. Alexander seemed to know the place. Intimately, the owner greeted him like an old friend, and our table was strategically placed in the back, away from windows and with a clear view of the entrance. "Why do you always choose tables where you can see who's coming in?" I asked, watching as his eyes automatically scanned each new person who arrived. "Habit." He took a sip of the red wine he'd ordered without consulting the menu. "In my line of work, it's important to always be aware. Does import-export require that much vigilance?" He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much of the truth he could share. "Let's just say my family does business with people who aren't always reliable. And when you inherit a name that carries weight, you also inherit the enemies that come with it." It was the first time he had mentioned enemies directly. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. "What kind of enemies?" "The kind you don't want to meet." His voice hardened for a moment. Then he forced a smile. "But enough serious talk. Tell me about the house project in Coral Gables." The change of subject was so abrupt that I understood I had touched on something he wasn't ready to share. Not yet. Over the following weeks, our dates became a delicious constant in my life. Alexander took me to places I never knew existed in Miami. A private club on the top floor of a Brickell skyscraper where he was apparently a member. A small hidden cafe in Little Havana that served the best Cuban coffee in the city. Yacht trips across Biscayne Bay at sunset. Each encounter revealed new layers of his complex personality. He was incredibly cultured, able to discuss Russian literature with the same passion he showed when talking about rare Italian wines. He spoke fluent Spanish with the Cuban waiters, Italian when he thought I wasn't paying attention, and always treated anyone who served us with a genuine courtesy that contrasted with his aura of unquestionable authority. But I also started noticing disturbing patterns. Alexander always carried 2 phones, one that rang constantly and another he only answered when we were alone. He always paid in cash, thick wads of bills he pulled from a leather wallet that seemed to hold more money than I earned in a month. And always there were men in dark suits positioned discreetly nearby. "Don't you think it's weird we never have complete privacy?" I asked one night as we walked down Lincoln Road after dinner at an Argentine restaurant. "Weird how?" "Your friends, they're always around." Alexander stopped walking and pulled me into a hug that looked casual to any observer, but his eyes quickly scanned the street around us. "It's for my protection. For our protection." "Protection from what?" "From people who might not like to see me happy." The answer chilled me. There was a sincerity in his voice that turned what I had been trying to ignore into a cold, frightening reality. Alexander wasn't just mysterious. He was in real danger. That night, when he took me home, we sat in the car for almost an hour, just talking. It was then that I saw the first cracks in his flawless facade. He told me about his father's death when he was young. An accident, as he put it. But the pain in his eyes suggested something far more violent and traumatic. I was 22 when I took over the family business, he said, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. I wasn't prepared for the responsibilities that came with the Benedetti name. It was the first time I had heard his full last name, Alexander Benedetti. It sounded Italian, aristocratic, and dangerous. It must have been hard, taking on so much responsibility so young. You have no idea. He looked at me with an intensity that made me forget how to breathe. For 13 years, Emily, every decision I make affects not just me, but dozens of families who depend on our organization. I can't afford to be reckless. But with you, for the first time in years, I want to be reckless. I want to make choices based on what I feel, not what's strategically sound. His words were simultaneously the most romantic and the most terrifying thing anyone had ever said to me. 3 weeks after our first date, Alexander invited me to his penthouse for dinner. I knew this would be a milestone in our relationship. He had never taken me to his home before. The apartment in South Beach was exactly what I expected from a man like Alexander. Elegant, masculine, and minimalist in a way that cost a fortune. Italian marble floors, furniture by designers I recognized from architectural magazines, and a panoramic view of the city that had to be worth millions. But it was when he removed his jacket and loosened his tie for the first time in my presence that I truly saw who he was behind the armor of elegance. His white silk shirt was slightly wrinkled, revealing that even he wasn't immune to stress. When he rolled up his sleeves, I noticed a thin scar on his left forearm, too linear to be accidental. Wine, he offered, heading to a climate-controlled wine cellar that took up an entire wall. Please. While he selected a bottle, I explored the room. The art was all original, much of it clearly old and priceless. But it was the framed photograph on a side table that caught my attention. An older man who looked remarkably like Alexander, arm in arm with a beautiful woman, both smiling at some elegant party. My parents, Alexander said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of red wine. This was taken 3 weeks before the accident. The pain in his voice was palpable. Without thinking, I touched his arm. I'm so sorry. He taught me everything about conducting business, about honoring commitments, about protecting the people who depend on you. Alexander took a long swallow of wine. But he never taught me how to deal with this. With what? With feeling vulnerable. The admission hung between us like a dangerous confession. Alexander, always in control, always flawless, was showing me a weakness very few people had ever seen. We had dinner on the balcony, overlooking the ocean and the lights of Miami Beach. Alexander had personally prepared a simple but perfect Italian meal: seafood risotto, a salad with tomatoes he swore were imported directly from San Marzano, and a tiramisu that rivaled anything I had ever tasted. You cook? I asked, surprised by his culinary skill. My nonna taught me before she passed. She said a man who couldn't feed the people he loved was only half a man. Your Italian grandmother? Sicilian, a small but fierce woman who ran our family with an iron fist. He smiled with genuine affection. She would have liked you. How can you be so sure? Because you're not afraid to challenge me. She always said strong women make strong men. After dinner, we sat on the couch with more wine, and the sexual tension that had been building for weeks finally became impossible to ignore. When Alexander pulled me onto his lap, I felt like I was on fire from the inside out. Emily, he murmured against my lips, you know that once we cross this line, there's no going back, right? Why wouldn't there be? Because when I care about someone, I protect them with my life, and my life comes with complications you don't fully understand yet. Then help me understand. Instead of answering, he kissed me with a desperate passion that seemed to contain years of loneliness. His hands were simultaneously gentle and possessive, his mouth a promise of pleasures I could barely imagine. We made love that night with an intensity that left me shaking. Alexander was attentive but dominant, gentle but completely in control. Every touch seemed to uncover parts of me I didn't know existed. Afterward, as I lay in his arms, he traced lazy patterns on my bare skin. I need to tell you some things, he said, his voice serious in the darkness. Can it wait until morning? It can. But Emily, he turned me to look into my eyes. When I tell you, everything will change. You need to be ready for that. I held his face between my hands, studying every line, every shadow. It already has. Since that first night on the Ferris wheel, everything has changed. He kissed me again, and I felt like I was sealing a pact whose terms I didn't yet fully know. But in that moment, wrapped in his arms, the scent of his skin mixed with mine, I didn't care about the consequences. I was lost and irrevocably in love with Alexander Benedetti, and he was right. There was no going back. The next morning, I woke up alone in his bed, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than my monthly rent. I found him in the kitchen, fully dressed again, dark suit, tie perfectly knotted, as if the vulnerability of the previous night had been just a dream. "I have to go out for a few hours," he said, pouring coffee into a porcelain cup that was probably a family antique. "Urgent business." "Okay." He studied me carefully, as if looking for signs of regret or fear. "Emily, about our conversation last night." "Alexander." I stood up and adjusted his tie, an intimate gesture that made him close his eyes for a moment. "I chose to be here. I chose you. Whatever you need to tell me, we can handle it together." For a moment, I saw something close to panic in his eyes, as if my acceptance was simultaneously everything he wanted and everything he feared. "You don't know what you're saying. Then show me. Teach me, but don't push me away." He kissed me with a tenderness that contrasted with the passion of the night before, as if he were memorizing the moment. "I'll be back in a few hours. We'll talk then." But when he returned that afternoon, carrying flowers and a grim expression I had never seen before, I knew our talk would change everything, perhaps in a way from which there truly was no turning back. Alexander returned at 6 in the evening with a bouquet of white orchids and an expression I had never seen before, a mix of determination and something that looked a lot like fear. He was still wearing the suit from that morning, but it was now slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, as if he had spent hours in tense meetings. "We need to talk," he said, placing the flowers in a vase with movements that were rougher than his usual elegance. I sat on the couch, watching him pour 2 glasses of Macallan whiskey with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Alexander was always controlled, always self-assured. Seeing him nervous terrified me more than any words could. "What happened today?" I asked. He sat beside me but kept a distance, a calculated space that seemed to protect both him and me. "Information came in about movements from people who are not fond of my family." He took a long drink of the whiskey. "Emily, there are things about my life I've omitted, not out of dishonesty but for protection." "What kind of things?" "The kind that could put your life in danger just by you knowing them." A cold dread crept up my spine, but I reached out and took his hand. "Trust me." Alexander looked at our intertwined hands as if they were the most precious and dangerous thing in the world. "My family, the Benedettis. We aren't just importers and exporters. We are, let's say, facilitators for businesses that operate on the fringes of the law." His voice was carefully modulated, each word chosen. "I inherited responsibilities that go far beyond simple companies. There are people who depend on us for protection, for territory, for resolving disputes that common law can't touch." The euphemism was elegant, but I wasn't naive. An Italian family, territory, protection, deadly enemies. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture I had tried to ignore. "Are you telling me you're—" "I'm telling you I live in a world where one wrong word can have permanent consequences, where loyalty is measured in blood and betrayal is punished severely." My mind slowly processed the implications. The constant bodyguards, the reverential respect he received everywhere, the way there was no trace of him online, the phone calls in Italian he took in threatening tones. "How long were you going to hide this from me?" "Forever, if I could have." His answer was brutally honest. "Emily, you're the first good thing that's happened in my life in years, the first person who looks at me and sees just Alex, not the head of the Benedetti family. I wanted to protect that, to protect you. And now? Now there are people who know about you, people who might try to use our relationship against me." The fear I had been suppressing finally manifested completely. Not fear of Alexander, but fear of the world he lived in, and into which I had dived headfirst. What kind of people? Vincent Torres, Vinny as he's known on the street. Alexander finished his whiskey in one go. He runs operations in New York, and our families have historical disagreements. I learned today that he's in Miami. The way he said the name, with a coldness that cut like glass, made me understand this wasn't simple business rivalry. What does he want? Territory, control, revenge. Alexander finally looked at me directly. And now apparently you. The next 2 weeks were a blur of tense luxury and growing paranoia. Alexander maintained our routine of dates, but everything had changed. Where there were once 2 discreet bodyguards, there were now 4 visibly armed men. Where we once dined in public restaurants, meals now took place in private clubs with controlled entry and security sweeps. I started noticing details that had previously escaped me. The way Alexander constantly adjusted his cuffs when he was nervous, a habit I realized was much more frequent. How his eyes never stopped moving, always cataloging exits and potential threats. How he spoke on the phone in elaborate codes that sounded like casual conversations but were clearly communicating vital information. Lorenzo arrived from New York, he announced one night during dinner at his penthouse. You'll meet him tomorrow. Who's Lorenzo? My right-hand man, my best friend since childhood. Alexander cut his steak with surgical precision. If anything happens to me, Lorenzo will take care of you. Nothing is going to happen to you. Emily. He stopped eating and looked at me with intensity. In this world, we have to prepare for every possibility. Lorenzo Rivers was exactly what I expected of Alexander's best friend. Impeccably dressed, lethally elegant, and clearly devoted to the man he called his boss. Tall and lean, with dark eyes that seemed to see everything, he treated our first meeting like a job interview for the most important position in the company. So you're the woman who managed to capture our Alex's attention, he said, studying me with a gaze that felt like it was reading my soul. I guess so. Good. He smiled, and for a moment he seemed almost human. He needed someone to remind him there's life beyond the business. During lunch at the private club Sea Spice, Lorenzo subtly explained the new rules of my existence. I would have discreet but constant protection. Certain areas of the city were now temporarily off-limits. My office would undergo security upgrades that were definitely not about common burglar alarms. It's temporary, Alexander assured me that night when I protested the invasion of my independence. As soon as the situation with Vinny is resolved, we'll go back to normal. And when will that be? When one of us is no longer breathing, he replied with a brutal frankness that chilled me to the bone. The first real attempt at intimidation happened a week later. I was leaving a client meeting in Coral Gables when I noticed the black Suburban that had been following me for 3 blocks. My phone rang. It was Alexander. Pull over. Now his voice was cold as steel. Alexander, Pull over, Emily. I had never heard him shout. I pulled into a shopping mall parking lot, and before I could blink, 2 black Escalades appeared from nowhere, surrounding my Honda Civic like sharks. Men in suits exited the vehicles with precise military movements. Alexander emerged from the first Escalade like a custom-tailored storm. Even running, his suit remained impeccable, but his expression was one of pure murderous fury. He pulled me from my car and quickly checked me over, as if looking for injuries. Are you okay? Did they touch you? Who? Alexander, you're scaring me. The men in the Suburban. They've been following you for 20 minutes. That's when I saw the black Suburban parked at a safe distance, 3 men standing outside, staring directly at us. One of them gave a sarcastic wave. Message delivered, one of them shouted, before they got back in their car and disappeared. Alexander spoke rapidly in Italian to his men, his posture radiating lethal authority. Then he led me to the Escalade, and for the entire ride to his penthouse, his hands shook with barely contained rage. They can't touch you, he repeated like a mantra. They can't even think about touching you. That night, for the first time, I saw Alexander completely lose control. He paced the penthouse like a caged animal, speaking on the phone in Italian in progressively more threatening tones. He threw his jacket on a chair, ripped off his tie, unbuttoned his shirt. It was like watching his armor being shattered by frustration and fear. They want a war, he said finally, pouring himself a bourbon with hands that still trembled. Vinny wants a war, and he's going to get one. Alexander, no. No what? Don't do anything rash because of me. He looked at me as if I had suggested he stop breathing. Emily, you don't understand. In my world, allowing someone to threaten what's mine is a sign of weakness, and weakness leads to death. Then take me out of the equation. How? Send me away, to my sisters in Seattle, anywhere, until this is over. Alexander stood still for a long moment, processing the suggestion. Then he laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. You think it's that simple? That I can just hide you until Vinny gets bored and leaves? He moved closer, cupping my face in his hands. Emily, you're not just my girlfriend now. You're my known weakness, my vulnerable point. Even if I sent you to the moon, he would find you. So what do? We do nothing. I end this. The finality in his voice terrified me. What does that mean? It means Vinny Torres made a choice when he threatened you, and now he has to live with the consequences of that choice. The next morning, I woke up alone again. I found a note on the kitchen table, written in Alexander's elegant script. Important meeting today. Lorenzo will stay with you. Do not leave the house. I love you more than my own life. Lorenzo arrived at 9 with gourmet coffee and a grim expression. Where did he go? I asked. To solve a problem. What kind of problem? Lorenzo studied me carefully before answering. The kind that, if solved correctly, will ensure you never have to worry about Vincent Torres again. And if it's not solved correctly, then you'll have much bigger problems to worry about. The hours dragged on like years. Lorenzo remained politely present but tense, taking constant phone calls in Italian. At 4 p.m, his phone rang, and he turned pale after listening to whoever was on the line. We need to go. Now. Where? To get Alexander. The drive to the financial district was a haze of distant sirens and gridlocked traffic. Lorenzo drove as if our lives depended on it, speaking rapidly into his phone in a mix of English and Italian. We stopped in front of a skyscraper in Brickell. Lorenzo guided me quickly through the marbled halls to a private elevator that went directly to the 40th floor. What happened? I asked, but he just shook his head. The elevator doors opened to reveal an office in chaos. Papers scattered, furniture overturned, glass shattered. And in the center of it all, Alexander sat in a leather chair, his white shirt stained with blood, being examined by a man who was clearly a doctor. Oh my God! I ran toward him, but Lorenzo held me back. He's okay. It's mostly the other guys. Alexander looked up when he saw me. Even injured, even with his face bruised and cut, his eyes lit up. Emily. My voice came out as a desperate whisper. I told you not to come, he murmured, trying to smile, but wincing in pain. What happened? Vinny wanted to talk in person. Alexander accepted help to stand, refusing the arm Lorenzo offered. The conversation didn't go as he expected. Is he alive for now? The coldness returned to Alexander's voice. But now he knows I'm not bluffing. Alex, Lorenzo stepped forward, we need to get out of here. The police will be here soon, and there are questions we'd rather not answer. During the ride back, sitting next to Alexander in the back of the Escalade, I held his hand and finally understood the reality of the world I had stepped into. This man I loved, this gentle man who cooked for me and quoted Italian poetry, was also capable of violence I could barely imagine. Do you hate me now? He asked, his voice vulnerable despite the brutality he'd just been a party to. Should I? Probably. I looked at his bruised face, at the hands that had touched me so tenderly, and now showed signs of a brutal fight. I love you, Alexander. All of you, even the parts that scare me. He closed his eyes as if my acceptance was both salvation and damnation. This isn't over yet, Emily. Vinny won't stop. Today was just the first round. So what happens now? Alexander opened his eyes, and I saw in them a relentless determination that made me understand the gentle man I met was just one facet of someone far more complex and dangerous. Now we wait for him to make the mistake of underestimating just how far I'm willing to go to protect you. That night, as we finally reached the safety of the penthouse, I knew our love story had crossed a line from which there was no return. I had seen Alexander's real world, had witnessed the brutal consequences of loving him, and yet as he fell asleep in my arms, I knew I would choose to stand by his side, no matter what came next. 3 days passed in a tense calm that reminded me of the silence before a devastating Miami hurricane. Alexander had ramped up security around the penthouse, turning our refuge into an elegant fortress. Armed men in flawless suits discreetly patrolled every floor, every entrance, every possible access point. Alexander had been different since the confrontation in the office. More attentive, more affectionate, as if every moment together could be our last. He had completely abandoned his suits at home, wearing only linen shirts and casual slacks, as if he'd finally realized the armor of elegance couldn't protect him from what truly mattered. On Thursday morning, I woke to find him already dressed, not in the casual attire of the past few days, but in a black suit I'd never seen before. It wasn't the usual elegance of Armani or Tom Ford. This one was functional, grim, made for quick movement and action. "Are you going out?" I asked, sitting up in bed and noticing him methodically checking a Glock before holstering it under his jacket. "An important meeting." He came over, sitting on the edge of the bed to kiss my forehead. "Lorenzo will stay here with you." "Alexander," I took his hand, noticing how cold it was despite the Miami morning heat. "Be careful." "I always am." "Promise you'll come back to me?" He looked at me with an intensity that made me forget how to breathe. "Emily, if something happens today, don't. Listen to me." His voice was firm but desperate. "If something happens, Lorenzo has instructions. You'll be protected, taken care of, always. Nothing is going to happen. Let's hope not." He kissed me with a desperate passion that felt like a farewell. "Ti amo più della mia vita." I love you more than my own life. He had never spoken Italian to me before. After Alexander left, I wandered the penthouse like a ghost. Lorenzo tried to distract me with talk of art and architecture, but his eyes constantly checked the phones he carried. At 10 o'clock, one of them rang. The conversation was brief, in Italian, but I saw Lorenzo's face go pale. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing to worry about right now. Alex is handling the situation, but his expression told a different story." At 11:15, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Don't answer that," Lorenzo said quickly, but I had already hit the button. "Emily Carter?" The voice was smooth, polite, with a New York accent that chilled my blood. "Who's calling?" "Vincent Torres. I believe you've heard of me." Lorenzo snatched the phone from my hand, but I could hear Vinny continue. "Tell your boyfriend I have a proposal he can't refuse. Pier 19, Warehouse 47, noon, alone." The line went dead. Shit. Lorenzo was already dialing furiously. Alex isn't picking up. The next 30 minutes were a blur of frantic activity. Lorenzo coordinated security teams, tried to locate Alexander, and made calls that sounded increasingly desperate. I dressed quickly, knowing instinctively that I wouldn't wait passively. "Emily, you can't leave here. If Alexander is in danger, he would kill me if I let anything happen to you. And I'll go crazy if I stay here not knowing what's happening." At 11:45, Lorenzo's phone rang again. This time, it was Alexander. "Where are you?" Lorenzo demanded immediately. I heard Alexander's voice through the speaker, tense but controlled. "On my way to the pier. Vinny has Emily." My world collapsed. "What?" Lorenzo looked at me, confused. "Alex, Emily is here with me." "No, she's not. They sent me a picture of her tied up in a shipping container. Lorenzo, they took my Emily." "Alex, look at your phone's camera." Lorenzo pointed his phone at me and I heard Alexander swear violently in Italian. "It's a trap," Lorenzo said. "They used an old photo or a look-alike. Emily is here, safe. It doesn't matter." Alexander's voice was as cold as winter. "He said he had Emily. He threatened the woman I love. This ends today. Alex, don't go alone. It's suicide. Get every available man. Position them around the pier, but keep your distance until my signal. Alex and Lorenzo. If I don't walk out of there, you know what to do." The call ended. For the next 45 minutes, I lived through hell. Lorenzo coordinated the operation remotely, constantly speaking with men strategically positioned around the port of Miami. I heard snippets of their communications, target on site, multiple hostiles confirmed, awaiting orders. Alexander arrived at Pier 19 at exactly noon, driving an unarmored black Audi alone, as demanded. Through the spotter's reports, I learned he got out of the car in his black suit, now tieless, his jacket open to show he wasn't visibly armed. Vinny Torres was waiting in warehouse 47 with at least a dozen men. He had turned the place into a fortress, a single point of entry, multiple defensive positions, and clear numerical superiority. Benedetti, Vinny's voice crackled through the comms unit Lorenzo had tuned to his men's frequency. Punctual as always. Torres. Even over the radio, Alexander's voice radiated lethal authority. You made a mistake threatening Emily. What, Emily? The little lady isn't here, but you are, and that's all that matters. That's when I realized it had all been an elaborate trap from the beginning. Vinny never intended to kidnap me. He just wanted to lure Alexander to a place where he could eliminate him for good. You're dumber than I thought, Alexander said, and there was a dangerously calm quality to his voice. Did you really think I'd come here alone and unarmed? You came alone, as we agreed. Lorenzo now, Alexander commanded. All hell broke loose from 6 different directions at once. Alexander's team stormed the warehouse with military precision. Over the radio, I heard the chaos. Shouts, gunfire, orders yelled in Italian and English. Lorenzo remained by my side, his tension palpable as he coordinated the assault. East. Sector clear. West sector, 3 hostiles down. Alex, are you okay? Wounded but functional. Where's Torres? Fleeing through the south side with 2 men. Don't let him escape. The battle lasted 17 minutes that felt like an eternity. When I finally heard Alexander's voice again, he sounded exhausted but alive. Torres is neutralized. Operation complete. Alex, do you need a medic? Yes, and I need to see Emily, now. Lorenzo and I arrived at the pier as the cleanup crews were already at work. Private ambulances, removal vans, men in suits coordinating the disposal of all evidence with an efficiency that suggested years of practice. I found Alexander sitting in the back of an ambulance, being treated by a private doctor. His white shirt was torn and blood-stained. There was a deep gash on his forehead, and he was holding his left arm at an odd angle. Emily. He tried to stand when he saw me, but the doctor forced him back down. Are you okay? I rushed to him, visually checking every visible wound. I am now. He pulled me into an awkward hug with his good arm. When I thought he had you, it was a trap. I was safe with Lorenzo the whole time. I know, Lorenzo told me, but Emily, he held my face with his uninjured hand. For a few minutes, I thought I'd lost you, and I realized I would rather die than live in this world without you. Vincent Torres? Alexander's expression hardened. He won't be bothering anyone again. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. Alex, Lorenzo approached. We need to get out of here. The police will arrive in 15 minutes, and the cleanup crews need to finish their work. During the ride back, I sat beside Alexander in the back of the private ambulance. The doctor had bandaged his left shoulder and stitched the cut on his forehead, but he had insisted on going home instead of to a hospital. How many men did we lose? He asked Lorenzo. 2 wounded, no fatalities. Torres's men weren't so lucky. Alexander closed his eyes, and I saw the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders. Emily, he said after a long silence. Yes? Do you still want to be with me? After all this, after seeing what my world really is, I looked at this man who had risked everything to protect me from a threat that didn't even exist, who had orchestrated urban warfare to defend my honor, who sat wounded and exhausted because he couldn't tolerate the thought of losing me. Alexander Benedetti, I said, taking his good hand. I chose you when you were just a mysterious man on a Ferris wheel. I chose you when I learned your secrets. I choose you now, knowing exactly who you are and what world you command. Even knowing it means our life will always have this kind of danger. Especially knowing it. He kissed me with a tenderness that dramatically contrasted with the brutal violence he had just orchestrated. It was like kissing 2 different men, the ruthless boss capable of eliminating enemies, without hesitation, and the vulnerable man who trembled at the thought of losing me. Ti amo, Emily Carter, forever. I love you too, all of you. When we arrived at the penthouse, Alexander finally allowed the doctor to examine him properly. 2 cracked ribs, multiple cuts and bruises, and a dislocated shoulder he had popped back into place during the fight. You need to rest, I insisted, helping him lie down on our bed. I need to talk to the heads of the other families. Explain what happened with Torres, make sure there's no retaliation. Lorenzo can do that. Emily, when you run an organization like ours, Alexander, I cut him off with a kiss. For one night, just one night, be just Alex. The man I love. Let Lorenzo be the head of the Benedetti family. He looked at me as if I had offered something impossible and precious. One night? One night. That night I cared for the man who had killed to protect me, who had risked everything for a love born on a Ferris wheel and forged in the fire of danger. I brought him soup, changed his dressings, and simply lay by his side as he slept, one hand always touching my arm, as if he needed constant reassurance that I was real and safe. When I woke the next morning, Alexander was sitting on the balcony, wearing only his pajama pants, looking out at the ocean. His back was a canvas of purple and yellow bruises that told the story of the previous day's battle. "How are you feeling?" I asked, sitting beside him. Like a man who finally understands what really matters in life. "And what's that?" He turned to look at me, and in his eyes, I saw not the feared head of the Benedettis, but simply the man who loved me beyond reason. You, Emily, always you. In that moment, sitting beside the most dangerous man in Miami, as he looked at me like I was his salvation, I knew our story had survived its trial by fire. We had faced the brutal violence of his world and emerged stronger, more united. But I also knew that while the immediate threat of Vincent Torres was gone, our life would never be completely safe. Loving Alexander Benedetti meant accepting there would always be other Vinnies, other threats, other moments when our love would be tested by fire and danger. And yet, looking into his wounded but determined eyes, I wouldn't have chosen any other life. The 3 days following the pier showdown passed in a haze of physical recovery and emotional turmoil. Alexander flatly refused to leave the penthouse, delegating all urgent responsibilities to Lorenzo, while he focused obsessively on my safety and well-being. "You have to stop looking at me like I'm going to disappear," I said on Sunday morning, finding him in the armchair by the bed, clearly having been awake all night watching me sleep. "I can't." His voice was hoarse with exhaustion. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that fake photo Vinny sent me. You, tied up, afraid." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that had become common. "I know it was a trap. I know you were safe the whole time, but my mind can't fully process it." I got up and knelt beside his chair, holding his face in my hands. His eyes were bloodshot with fatigue, and the bruises on his face had darkened to deep shades of purple and yellow. "Alexander, look at me. I'm here. I'm safe. I'm with you." "For how long?" The question came out as a desperate whisper. "Emily, you saw what happened. You saw how my world works. How can I ask you to live knowing there will always be another Vinny, another threat, another moment where I could lose you?" It was the first time I had seen him truly broken. The man who commanded one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the East Coast was crumbling because he couldn't guarantee the absolute safety of the woman he loved. "You can't," I answered honestly. "You can't guarantee me total safety. Just like I can't guarantee I won't get hit by a car tomorrow, or that I won't get cancer at 40, or any of the 1,000 horrible things that can happen in life. It's different. It's more intense, but it's not different. Alexander, life has always been dangerous. The difference is that now I know exactly what kind of danger we face, and I know I have the most powerful man in Miami willing to move mountains to protect me." He pulled me onto his lap, ignoring the obvious pain in his cracked ribs. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." I kissed his forehead, careful not to touch the stitches. "I choose you, Alexander. I choose you, your world, your dangers, your responsibilities, all of it." "Why?" "Because in the last 3 months, you've made me feel more alive than in the previous 28 years. Because when you look at me, I see who I really am. Because even in the middle of a literal war, your first thought was to protect me." That afternoon, Lorenzo arrived with a detailed report on the fallout from the confrontation. We sat in the living room, Alexander still moving gingerly because of his ribs, while Lorenzo laid out the new political reality of their world. The removal of Vincent Torres was well received by the other families, Lorenzo said, consulting his notes. He'd been causing trouble for years, not just for us. Tony Martelli from Boston said you did everyone a favor. And the authorities? Alexander asked. Pier 19 officially suffered an electrical fire that destroyed Warehouse 47. There's no physical evidence of what really happened. The Torres crew members who survived went back to New York with clear instructions to keep their mouths shut. How many survived? 3 of the 12. They got the message. Alexander nodded, but I saw the weight of that information on his shoulders. 9 men were dead because he couldn't tolerate a threat against me. It was a brutal calculus that I was beginning to understand. And our men? Marcus is in the private hospital with a bullet in his shoulder, but he'll make a full recovery. Roberto had a concussion but has already been discharged. Everyone else is operational. Arrange for bonuses for their families, especially for Marcus. Already done. And Torres's operations in New York? Being absorbed by the Colombos. Without leadership, the Torres organization fragmented in 48 hours. As they discussed the territorial and political realignment following the elimination of a major crime figure, I slowly processed what it all meant. Alexander hadn't just won a war. He had fundamentally shifted the balance of power in an entire world I barely knew. There's one more thing, Lorenzo said, hesitating for the first time. Agent Cole from the FBI is asking questions about the pier fire. Alexander went still. What kind of questions? He knows it was more than an electrical fire. Has sources in the fire department who reported evidence inconsistent with the official story. Can he prove anything? Not with what he has now. But he's digging. And Emily. Lorenzo looked at me uncomfortably. Your name came up in his investigation. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Cole knows about your relationship with Alex. He knows you were under protection during the confrontation. He's trying to figure out your connection to the events. Alexander stood up abruptly, ignoring the evident pain. This stops. Now. Alex, he's FBI. We can't just... I can and I will. Alexander's voice carried a lethal authority I rarely heard. Emily will not be dragged into this. What are you going to do? I asked, recognizing the dangerous tone. I'm going to have a talk with Cole. Make it clear that Emily has absolutely nothing to do with my business. And if he doesn't believe you, he will. The certainty in his voice terrified me more than Vinnie Torres's original threat. That night, after Lorenzo left, Alexander and I talked about the future for the first time since the showdown. We were on the balcony, him in just a t-shirt that revealed the bandages around his ribs, me in one of his shirts that came down to my knees. Emily, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. I always am. Do you really want this life? Not the romantic fantasy of dating a dangerous man, but the reality. Federal agents investigating our relationship. Enemies who will always see you as a target. Decisions being made that affect human lives. I considered the question carefully. Over the past 3 days, I had witnessed the true weight of Alexander's world. I had seen how every decision had deadly consequences, how he carried the responsibility for dozens of families, how he lived with the constant knowledge that his enemies were looking for any weakness to exploit. Can I ask you a question too? Of course. Can you walk away? Really walk away from all of this and live a normal life? He was silent for a long moment. Not completely. My name, my family, my position, they come with lifelong responsibilities. I can delegate more to Lorenzo. I can step back from the day-to-day operations. I can focus on more legitimate businesses. But I'll never be just a normal businessman. Then my answer is yes, I want this life, because I want you, and you come with this life. Even knowing the dangers, especially knowing the dangers. Alexander, in the last 3 months, you've shown me a world I never knew existed. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's scary, but it's also real in a way my old life never was. He pulled me closer, and we stood in silence, watching the lights of Miami stretch to the horizon. There's one thing you need to know, he said finally. What? Cole isn't our only problem. With Vinny gone, other families will want to test our limits. See if the victory has made us complacent or if we're stronger than before. What does that mean for us? It means the next few months are going to be delicate. I'll need to be more visible, more aggressive in showing strength. There will be meetings, negotiations, possibly other confrontations. And me? You will be protected, always. But Emily, he turned to face me directly. If you stay with me, there's no middle ground. You'll be in this world completely, with everything that implies. Including being investigated by the FBI. Including that. And possibly being targeted by other rival families. Yes. And having to live knowing you might have to make life and death decisions. Yes. I took a deep breath, processing the magnitude of what he was offering, or warning me about. Alexander, since we met, my life has completely changed. Not just because I fell in love with you, but because you showed me I was just existing before. Now I'm living. Even if living means being in constant danger, especially because of it. He kissed me with an intensity that felt like a contract being sealed. When we broke apart, his eyes were shining with a mixture of relief and determination. Then let's do this the right way. What do you mean? I mean, if you're going to be a part of this world, you're going to be all in as my wife, not just my girlfriend. My heart stopped. Alexander, Emily Carter, will you marry me, knowing exactly who I am, what world I command, and what kind of life I can offer you? I looked at this man who had literally killed to protect me, who was offering me not just his heart, but full entry into a world of power and danger few people ever knew. Yes, I answered without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. When he kissed me this time, I felt like we were sealing not just our commitment to each other, but our shared destiny in a world that would never be simple or safe, but would be ours. That night, making love carefully because of his injuries, I understood we had crossed every possible line. There was no going back, no more doubts, no more fear of the unknown. I was officially part of Alexander Benedetti's world, and he was mine, with all the glorious and terrifying consequences that entailed.